Welcome, Ray, to our second interview about the incredible planetary lineup of spring 2016.
Thank you, Antonia. It's good to be with you again.
Yeah, and vice versa. Okay,
Thank you.
we're going to continue guiding people through this fascinating and challenging spring lineup of geocosmic signatures. Let's briefly review these signatures and how events are unfolding as we start this spring period.
Yes. Well, the spring season began with the lunar eclipse in Aries and Libra on March 23rd. And right away, we had terrorist attacks in Brussels.
Yes.
Now, this not only relates to the lunar eclipse, but also to the movement of Mars into Sagittarius. And while it's in Sagittarius, it's going to come very close to Saturn before turning retrograde on April 17th. And one day later, Pluto's going to also turn retrograde.
Yeah, and
Now,
Ray, if you pay attention to these slides, I found out that the moon will highlight these movements as well. When Mars and
interesting.
Saturn go retrograde, moon will be conjunct Jupiter and fulfill the T-square. And when Pluto turns retrograde, moon will be trining Pluto. So it's kind
A
of
very
it's
good
highlighting
observation.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, historically, Mars in Sagittarius is associated with violence in the Middle East. And we know in classical astrology, whenever Mars and Saturn are in the same sign, it can be a warlike combination. So this is interesting. You point out at the same time the moon is part
Yeah.
of that T-square as well with
Yeah. So
Saturn
that,
and Jupiter and Neptune.
yeah, that may indicate that this period of April 17, 18 can be quite difficult. And
Yeah.
yes, in our last interview, you did say Mars and Saturn together in a fire sign like Sagittarius is a classic signature of war threats. And Mars and Pluto highlighted together can symbolize a time when cruelty and threats to human lives are greater than usual. Yeah, there we
Right.
go. And you also said these signatures not only signify important movements in financial markets, but also in world politics and possibly events of nature. So, what do you see so far in terms of world economics and financial markets?
Well, a lot has happened in these last 2 weeks. If we go back to a point that could be viewed as the start of this incredible spring lineup, that would be the solar eclipse of March 8th that occurred at 18 degrees of Pisces, almost exactly opposite Jupiter, as you show on the slide here. Now, that was the time that the European Central Bank President Mario Draghi, he shocked the world when he announced a much greater than expected economic stimulus package. He decided to lower the short-term rates in Europe to minus 0.4%. And if that wasn't enough, he also announced another very ambitious quantitative easing program. So now the central bank's going to buy more government bonds and also corporate bonds. So this extreme generosity is consistent with Jupiter, which is in Virgo and in opposition to the solar eclipse, as you show on the slide.
And here's a
So,
chart of Mario Draghi.
well,
Here,
it's interesting.
yeah.
Here's Mario Draghi, born September 3rd, 1947, as you show here at 4:30 p.m. in Rome, and that's according to the information given by one of my clients.
Okay.
So he's under the influence of Jupiter going through Virgo this year, which means he's like Santa Claus.
Oh.
One economist said that his stimulus package was like throwing in everything to make this economy grow, including the kitchen sink. But, we got to remember, if you're getting Jupiter now, you're also getting Mars and Saturn now, especially those born with the sun between 8 and 16 degrees of mutable signs. And Draghi's sun and Venus are right there at 10 degrees of Virgo, as you see, which is a mutable sign. And his Mercury is there, the ruler of his chart. So he's being hit with a Jupiter-Saturn square this season as well. So he may be feeling very generous, but because Saturn is there, there's going to be consequences for these actions.
Yeah, probably serious ones. And
Probably.
was there anything else that happened in the world of finances that gives us a clue of what to expect?
Yes, because the following week, on March 15th, the United States Federal Reserve Bank, our central bank, decided not to raise their short-term interest rates. Now, just 3 months ago, they announced they were going to raise the rates 4 times this year. And now last week, they backed off of that, and they say they might raise it maybe 2 times. So like Mario Draghi and the ECB, this is a decision that's designed to stimulate the economy of the United States. So on these 2 central bank announcements, stock markets around the world soared. And many, like the Dow Jones Industrial Average, are right on the verge of making a very technical breakout. So as you can see on this chart that you show on the screen here, the Dow Jones has made a 3-point trend line, A, B, and C. And it started with A, which was the all-time high in May of 2015. And then B and C were the highs in November and December. And you can see just last week, actually earlier this week, it went up and is testing that line. Now, since the ECB and the Fed announcements started in early March, you can see here the Dow Jones has soared, and as I say, is testing this trend line. If it can break above that trend line, we're going to be talking about asset inflation. We're going to be talking about irrational exuberance in the stock market again, which is code for Jupiter in opposition to Neptune, which is part of this incredible lineup.
Yeah, I made here a slide to show that during the whole time between March 23rd and June 7th, all these planets will be around, just a few degrees of this square. They will stay very, very tight in this square all the time.
Yeah, you show that Jupiter's at 15 to 16 of Virgo, Saturn between 12 and 16 of Sag, Neptune 10 to 12 of Pisces. That's a pretty tight T-square. It's a mutable T-square.
Yes. So this sounds like the stock markets could become very bullish.
Exactly. If it starts to break above that trend line that we showed earlier, the stock markets of the world could soar to new all-time highs. And I think that's exactly what the central banks want, judging by their very accommodative monetary policy decisions these past 2 weeks.
So in light of these incredible spring geocosmic signatures, why do you think the ECB and Federal Reserve Bank are acting so aggressively?
Well, there could be many reasons. The most common would be that they fear the world economies are headed for deflation. They may fear the world economic growth is too anemic, and it has been since the Great Recession of 2008 to 2009. And if we get deflation happening, that could send the global economy into another serious recession. And that's consistent with Jupiter square Saturn, which can be a recessionary signature. So they may be messaging the world that the global economy is not so great. And if that's true and these stimulus measures don't work, and the stock markets don't break above these trend lines, then stocks could turn bearish. And the irrational exuberance of Jupiter and Neptune could turn to panic and hysteria because of Saturn involved. Now, central banks obviously don't want that to happen. So these maneuvers, I think, are an attempt to prevent that. Now, if they're successful and they can get the stock markets to break out to the upside, suddenly the wealth of the world increases dramatically. This will create asset inflation, which may start more regular inflation in other areas of the economy, such as wages. That, in turn, will coincide with a much more robust economy going into the USA November presidential elections.
Aha, so I hear your bell ring. Presidential elections. It has something to do with that, right?
I think so. I mean, it's theory, of course, but that's my job. I'm supposed to be, connecting these dots together to figure out what's really behind it all. So, yeah, I think there's a secondary and possibly a more nefarious reason for sudden and aggressive changes in monetary policy. I mean, just remember, part of this incredible spring lineup that you show here on the chart involves Saturn square Neptune. And whenever Neptune's involved in an aspect like this, the real intentions may be disguised to cover up hidden agendas. So imagine that you're Janet Yellen or maybe even Mario Draghi. You're the head of a major central bank. Who is the most frightening candidate running for the United States presidency? Which
Well,
candidate represents the greatest threat to your independence and power as a central banker? Who do you think?
well, I think there's only one answer.
Right, it's Donald Trump. And what is the most popular platform he's running on? It's that the United States and the world economy is anemic, that growth is pathetic, and he, as a successful billionaire businessman, he can rescue this world economy, this national economy of the United States, and he can create real growth. So how do you take that argument away from him? Well, simple. You create a dynamic economy by bringing about growth and wealth explosion, by creating another record-breaking stock market going into the election. So by financially engineering a robust economy going into an election, the central banks can hinder his chances of becoming the next USA president. He'll have no room to argue that the economy sucks anymore by not raising interest rates prior to the election and by implementing new quantitative easing programs. The central banks practically guarantee the economy will grow much more vigorously going into the USA election. And in the United States, the Fed can use the convenient excuse that they don't want to raise rates because they don't want to interfere with the election, when in fact, that's exactly what they would be doing. So it's a classical symbolism of Saturn square Neptune. You say one thing, you really mean the opposite.
Whew.
Now, this is what I see connecting the dots together. It may be a bit nefarious, maybe a bit of a stretch, but I kind of think that Janet Yellen doesn't want to see, no federal bank head wants a central bank head wants to see Donald Trump because he's sort of a loose cannon in their eyes. So you can see this possibility if you look at Donald Trump's chart, which you show on here. And then you look at the chart of Janet Yellen, you'll see Donald Trump has Mars rising in Leo, right?
Yes.
And Janet Yellen has her sun in late Leo and her moon opposite that in Aquarius. So if you think the battle between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump could be nasty, just wait until he starts on Janet Yellen with her moon opposite his Mars, as you show in this chart.
Yeah, you see Mars, her moon, and also her sun. All these lights are in explosive closeness to each other when you compare both charts.
Well, yeah, that's the full moon in her chart, and it falls on Donald Trump's Mars in Leo on the ascendant, which can be quite boisterous and argumentative and insulting.
Yes,
So it'd be quite a battle between these two if it gets that far.
So, what's the bottom line here? How can we benefit from this knowledge?
Well, the bottom line is that European and American economies are on the verge of an economic boom going into this election. If the Dow Jones Industrial Average can start to rise above 18,000 or even 17,750, the stock markets might be starting an explosive move upwards. This in turn could lead to inflation. Certainly asset inflation and wealth creation in this environment because investors, well, in this kind of environment, if it's going to break out, investors will be well advised to prepare to enter the stock market. But I've got to put out a couple of points of consideration here.
Yes.
Until the Dow actually breaks above that trend line, there still remains a danger of the stock market falling and the economy going into recession. So failure to break out may also mean that central banks are losing their power to engineer financial markets and economies, not to mention political elections. Second, if it does break out and the economies do explode, inflation could quickly follow. Economies could overheat too quickly, and then it'd be much harder to stop inflation once it starts. To do so, central banks would have to start raising rates quickly, which would then cause a sudden reversal right back down again by the middle of 2017.
Ooh, that sounds wild. Where can
It's gonna be a wild
it's going to be a wild time. And where can people find out more about your ideas about this?
Well, they can go to my website at www.mmacycles.com, and every Friday night, Saturday morning, they can read a free weekly column that I put up on my website. Or if they request it, we can send them this free weekly column through a distribution list via email. So just contact our office at 1-248-626-3034, or go to our website, or go to our German website, which is at www.mma-europe.ch. That's how they can find out more about it.
Okay, and if you want to know how the effects of these constellations work in your own life, you can, of course, book a reading about your personal chart and contact me through email or to my website, www.antonialangsdorf.com. Okay, Ray, thank you for these very interesting insights. I think we will keep people posted, just as we did this time when you spontaneously said, hey, we need to bring out something new here. Things have happened. I want to address them. And that way, stay tuned and find out what Ray Merriman has to say.
Well, I think we have a duty here.
Yes, we
During this
do.
period. We brought up the idea this incredible spring lineup, and we have a duty to guide people through our understanding of the cosmic relationship to events on Earth. That's our job.
Okay, so you will keep informing you people when the next video is up. And
Yes.
so stay tuned.